Today I have 4 photo editing details that are just as easy to miss as they are to fix. Hello again, I'm Abbey Esparza with photomanipulation.com, and I have a super quick video today talking about 4 commonly overlooked details in creative compositing. And it's not because they're hard to fix, they are incredibly easy to fix. If anything, they're just kind of boring. But they are surprisingly important, especially when it comes to portraits, because they can be pretty glaringly obvious. But first, let me tell you about our very own Epic Overlay Bundle. Rain, snow, water, fire, and so much more in both standard JPEG and transparent PNGs, so nice. Over 500 easy-to-use assets, just drag and drop them, instant dynamic scenes, and frankly, you'll probably end up fixing some of the issues we're about to cover here today. Check them out in the link down in the description. So we're going to start things off with what gave me the idea to create this video in the first place. Eyelashes. Or more accurately, making sure you don't chop them off while extracting, and if you do, remembering to bring them back, especially when it comes to portraits. Even if it's the tiniest little single extra long eyelash that's just barely sticking out, you gotta paint that sucker back in. I see this all the time, and I do it all the time. It's an easy thing to forget about or say, I'll get to it later. And this can be applied to any micro detail in general. Shoelaces are another big offender that I see pretty often. Anything with small strings, fur, hair, or thread, basically. Not including these details in your extractions will give you what I call the sticker book effect. No detail, no depth, no texture, kinda like a cheap sticker. The fix? Super simple. Take the time to include them when you're doing your image extracting. The Refine Edge brush inside of Select and Mask does a great job at grabbing those smaller edges. Just make sure Smart Radius is checked, and I like to set it to around 3 or 4. Or grab a drawing tablet if you have one, a cheap one will do just fine, and mask it in using a simple brush. You can also just straight up paint back in the details on a new layer, color match, and again grab a small default round brush and get the painting. When it comes to the eyelashes, this by far is the easiest option for me most of the time. No painting skills required. Next up, we gotta talk about them fingernails. Ignoring how gross my nails look, we should focus on how gross your subjects should or shouldn't look. If they should be long or short, neat and tidy, or broken and chipped. If they should even have nails at all. That last one is mostly for my fellow body horror / dark artists out there, but the general concept applies to all genres. Because even if those long acrylics the model has on fit the character being created, what about the color? Right down to the hue's shade, it all needs to be considered. It's a small detail that's easy to just be lazy about and say, sure, why not? Why can't they look like that? But those are the details that tie an image together and make it feel complete. Because if you were painting this image from scratch, you'd have to think about those nails, their shape, and their color. So, the fix? Again, easy. Just keep the nails in mind while you're doing your composite. For color, I like to use either layer modes or a hue saturation adjustment layer. If they are long, you can either clip them when you're doing your extraction. If they are at an angle, that makes that an option. Or if not, you can use something like the clone stamp tool combined with the lasso tool. You can even altogether remove fingernails using the clone stamp tool if all you need are fleshy little nubs. But again, that might just be a me thing. Moving on to consistent focus or depth. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before, but I'll repeat myself just in case. When putting together a composite, you're going to be working with multiple images. I mean, obviously, that's what a photo composite is. But you're going to want to check that your composite as a whole not only has a consistent focus, and that all of the individual elements have proper sharpness and depth according to wherever they're placed, but that the edges of those elements reflect the sharpness or lack thereof. For instance, in a photo of someone jumping, the hands and feet might have some natural motion blur. You need to keep that in mind while extracting. In portraits, the lower bottom half of the subject is usually slightly out of focus. Also the shoulders or ears. The fix here, I have two go-tos, both using layer masks. So first, I extract my subject using either the pen tool, which will give you an accurate but overly sharp edge in my opinion, or the select subject tool combined with select and mask. Or I just mask using a default round brush, which I have been really actually enjoying recently. But once that's all done, I grab the smudge tool and I use that to match the edges of the mask to the edge of the element. You can add some feather or blur by moving the mouse horizontally, and then you can add some motion blur with some up and down motions. I also tend to add a 0.5 to 0.9 feather to most layer masks using the properties panel. Doing that will help avoid the sticker book effect, like I mentioned earlier. And finally, consistent noise and grain. You want to make sure the overall noise or grain in your final image is consistent and at least somewhat uniform. I used to do this all the time since I use a lot of silhouette or abstract backgrounds that I quickly make with a color fill layer. So my main subject would have a fine natural grain from the photos, but my background layer would be overly smooth, completely smooth, creating a disconnect between the two. Now, if you use a ton of textures, especially from traditional mediums like watercolor, manually adding in grain will be less of an issue. The grain adds a consistent texture, so you're good to go if you achieve that texture in other ways. So, the fix. If you're using high quality photos like those found at neostock.com, then you can add a nice subtle grain right at the end. I like to use either the grain filter in Camera Raw found under the Effects tab, or I like to use the Optics plugin by Boris FX, a premium plugin, get 25% off, link it down in the description, that has tons of filters and effects, including a really nice grain filter. It's super nice because you get a bit more control, which I'm a big fan of. The default noise filter is also fine, especially if you just want to quickly add a bit of grain, and it's not a focal point or anything like that. So you can either bring the grain up in all of your photos to match the grainiest photo, not upping the grain in that photo, or remove all noise and then add in some artificial noise. Replacing real noise with fake noise can sometimes look better, especially if the image is extra noisy and like an ugly kind of blurry noise. Or you can add a final wash of grain once everything is finished, which I'm a big fan of. Or a combination of all three, of course. I know adding noise to an image seems counterproductive, but the grain can make things feel a little less Photoshoppy. And that about covers it for things you can maybe look out for or try out in the future. If you have any things to add or comments, ideas, or of course questions, feel free to post them down below. I do read all of the comments, but I don't technically get notifications, and I hate seeing a question that I missed and never answered. So an even better place for questions is our very own PM Facebook group. I'll link that down below. Or you can always hit me up on my own Instagram at Abbey Marie Esparza. You can also check out how to make tiny dainty little tears or big sobbing ones, both are relatable, in my how to paint tears video, free brush set included. I'm Abbey Esparza with photomanipulation.com, see you next time.